We are here with the American League East this time around. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the OK Baseball Podcast. Now, Sean, if this is anything like we did with the last episode, as soon as we get this one published and out, something big is going to happen in the AL East. We did the NL East just last episode, and honestly, hours after this bad boy was published, the big thing happened with Trey Turner. So we're bound to basically set up a big thing happening in the American League East. How has it been? I know that we're really excited for this one. Obviously, you are a huge Jays fan. You run the site Jays from the Couch. I'm a pretty big Orioles fan myself. I do cover baseball in general, but this is going to be a very, very fun division to cover. How's it going, my man? I think you're on mute, my friend.
Am I?
All right, cool. Look at that, starting it off strong.
There we go. See, it's everything will be okay.
It's chaos. Yeah, exactly.
It's okay. Yeah, no, I'm excited for the AL East conversation. I think both of us have a base kind of in that division as well, and I think I'm looking forward to the further revenue stream from our cut from all these deals that are about to happen, because clearly, as evidence from our last episode, we make shit happen.
That's right. Yeah, we definitely got to keep that in mind. So I'm sure if there's any kind of crazy tweets happening throughout our episode, go ahead and drop them in the comments. Let us know. Maybe we will speed up the process. Maybe we're going to be as good as Miralax, my friend, and we'll get that going and get that ready to go. But this is what we're here for this week around. We're going to give you a nice power hour of the American League East. We're going to break down all the teams and give a nice offseason picture. We'll talk about some of the additions that already have happened between those teams, or some that we believe that are going to happen in the future. We're going to have some fun discussions around here, and I'm really excited. You ready to get started with this one?
Let's do it.
All right. Well, before we get started, got to say this is going to be a nice crossover with the OK Baseball Podcast and Sean's site, Jays from the Couch. So if you are a fan from Jays from the Couch, welcome. We are glad to have you here. We are going to give you content every other week here at the OK Baseball Podcast. And then once we get to the season, we are going to be weekly. So pretty excited for that. So if you're looking for more content, not just your Blue Jays, we'll have you covered at the OK Baseball Podcast. But before we start with the Blue Jays, Sean, we're going to going with the Baltimore Orioles. Okay. I'm going to have to take the command at the beginning here and get the lead off with this one. The Orioles had a very fun season last year. Now, someone who has seen this team struggle in years past, it has been a nice breath of fresh air. And I mean, you could honestly say from the moment Adley Rutschman came in, he had his catcher's mask on, did that nice look around, that nice picture, nice video you can see of Adley Rutschman just taking it all in. It looked almost like he inhaled the bad feelings of the Orioles fan base, exhaled it, and then they started doing pretty good. There was moments that we were only days away from being in the playoffs. The Orioles were in the playoff picture come end of September, Sean. I mean, how do you even talk about that? This is a great start to this conversation. The Orioles were pretty good last year.
Surprised me, and not even by a little bit. I did not see it happening. I knew it would be a kind of a rebuilding development year, whatever you want to call it. And then there's lots of talent on the roster, obviously, but the way that they were able to just come out of nowhere and continue to challenge for that wild card. I know there was a time where, as a Blue Jays fan, I'm sweating looking at the standings and just thinking, how is this even happening? So you knew they were primed for an offseason, an interesting one, regardless of how it would play out, right? Because they have to make that decision, like, how do we go from surprising the American League East and building upon that and still competing and still rebuilding. Like, it's a fascinating time to be an Orioles fan, I would say.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Definitely a surprising season, the 2022. And I think the biggest question that most fans have, including the fans in Baltimore, is how do you capitalize on that moving forward? Obviously, we're sitting right now where we stand at today's date on the 14th of December. Every single team in the American League East, with the exception really of the Orioles, has done something as a decent splash inside free agency. Now, they did add Kyle Gibson. that is something that can help with the bolster of the rotation. We saw that with Jordan Lyles last year with Baltimore. They had just the guy who was not afraid to eat innings, and that really helped out with that younger core. Not sure if Kyle Gibson's going to be that guy. They might go in a different direction to still add in that aspect. I will say there was some interesting news, and we were talking about this just before we started. Obviously, the huge news broke last night that Carlos Correa went over to the San Francisco Giants. Crazy deal going over there. But an offer from Correa did trickle out that the Orioles did offer Carlos Correa 7 years for $190 million. Now, obviously, that is not as much as Correa is getting from San Francisco, but that does say that Baltimore is not afraid to spend money on a big time player right now. And that's a pretty interesting concept as we still have some pretty decent players left in the free agent pool, Sean.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's the big takeaway from whether or not they were able to land Carlos Correa. It doesn't really, it's not going to change the fortunes of their season or even their off season dramatically. But what it does say to the fans is that for the right player, they are willing to spend that kind of money. And the Orioles remind me a lot of the Toronto Blue Jays over the last couple of years. They're on the young talent is starting to come up, and the roster age goes down, and then you find out how much talent you really have, and it surprises a lot of people. Even the Blue Jays themselves. I think 2019 was that rebuilding year, and then they make the postseason in 2020, expanded playoffs. Notwithstanding. And I think the Orioles are in a great position to do exactly what the Toronto Blue Jays did. You have a talent base now, and I think this is where you start maybe not necessarily overhauling your roster like the Seattle Mariners or the San Diego Padres have done year after year, but you start to collect those kind of veteran pieces, the pieces that you think will be with you in the mid term. I don't want to say short term, and I don't want to say long term, but a mid term. Like the 4 or 5 deals, like a Hyunjin Ryu kind of deal, where you start kind of building that proven talent to add to the core, and then step by step, incrementally, in a few years, this Orioles team could be very, very dangerous.
Well, this year does start something that will improve the payroll, at least in the eyes of money wise, but nothing that's going to impact on the field. I don't know if you saw this, but the Chris Davis deferred payments do begin this season. So the Orioles, Bobby Bonilla, if you will, until 2037 does begin this season. He's going to get $9.16 million this year to have somebody call him Smash Davis sitting on the couch. So probably smashing 12 ounces of your favorite nectar. But yeah, interesting concept there. Really cool. Chris Davis, hey, he's about to get paid. That $9.16 million is for the next 2 seasons, 23, 24, actually in 25 as well. We talked about Kyle Gibson. Now, I think they're not done there. There's some conversations that they're still in the mix for Rendon, which is interesting. If they didn't get the Correa deal, maybe they'll put the money on a pitcher. Then there's also guys out there like maybe a Syndergaard, so maybe another short-term 1-year contract. I'll say this a lot on this show. There's not a 1-year deal I don't like, so I wouldn't be mad to see maybe someone like that, like a Syndergaard, coming over to Baltimore. What's your thoughts on maybe adding another piece like that?
Yeah, I think it's so hard to tell in the context of this off season, because pitchers are going for a rate that I don't think many people expected. And everybody is, for that matter. Let's be real; it's not just pitchers. So I think that's the first thing that, like, I think you're going to see them spend money. And it may not necessarily land them, a Rodon type pitcher. Like the Blue Jays just signed Chris Bassett for a reasonable price, but that's $21 million a season, right? And he's their 4th starter. So that's the kind of the going rate here. So I wouldn't be surprised at all to see a Noah Syndergaard type deal. But I also wouldn't be surprised for a lot of people to say, well, that's a huge overpay, and the Orioles aren't really in a position where they need to be overpaying. But that's just the cost of pitching. So I think we need to kind of like get our heads around that before we start, talking about who they could pursue and who they should pursue. I think that's the first thing, that it'll look like they're spending more than they actually are, just because of the inflated price of pitching. That being said, a Noah Syndergaard on a 2-year deal with an option for the Baltimore Orioles would look pretty good. I would say, because that kind of lines up with their what I see is their kind of competitive window when they're really, really going to be one of the teams to beat in the AL East.
Now, this is a tough division, and I feel like we have said this
Yeah,
probably for the last decade, maybe even longer, with
yeah.
maybe a period here and there, like a 1 year offset, right? When I think about this Orioles team, immediately my mind comes, well, are they going to be as successful as they were last year, or are we going to see kind of like how the 2020 Miami Marlins were, right? Where they made the playoffs and then they fell off. Like, what kind of team are we going to see in 2023? I obviously hope for them to be successful and to be able to compete for a wild card or even an AL East championship. But someone who looks on it from the outside, Sean, what's your thoughts there? Do you think that the Orioles can be exactly where they were last year, or was there just maybe too much magic to repeat?
Yeah, I don't know. I think the trade deadline could have gone a massive. In sorry, let me try this again. The trade deadline could have pushed this in a massive direction one way or another. They could have had a complete tear down and Cedric Mullins and everybody. But they didn't do that. So to me, that's what's fascinating is they kind of kept a lot of that young talent that took them to be the surprise of certainly the American League. So I would say that the Orioles are actually a team that's kind of scary right now, given the fact that they're young. There's money to spend. I'm actually kind of high on them as opposed to some of the other teams in this division. So I can see absolutely challenging for a wild card spot.
I like that. See, someone who
Yeah,
follows the Orioles, I like that. That you say that they are a scary team. Good to hear.
I
All right,
think
let's
so.
talk about another team here with the Boston Red Sox. And Boston had a rough season last year. Now we go from a team who had the most probably shocking in the positive outlook for the AL East to probably the team who had the most shocking in a negative aspect. This was a team that I thought could have maybe at the beginning of the season could have run for the AL East championship, been that sleeper. That was obviously not the case whatsoever. And now we are seeing them not only with the heartbreak of losing Mookie Betts a few years back, now we have them not getting Xander Bogaerts. He's now at San Diego. There's some conversation here that now we have to get Devers extended. If not, I think the fan base might just get up and quit. I don't know what's going to happen if that's the case. So we really have to figure out what that's the case. I think before we get started and dig into this offseason, I think we really have to talk about the fact that now they've lost Mookie Betts, traded to the Dodgers. They lost Xander Bogaerts, who signed with the Padres, and there's other names that you can talk about. These homegrown players that they got rid of. Andrew Benintendi, he was traded to the Royals initially from Boston. Jackie Bradley Jr. was traded to the Brewers. Christian Vasquez was traded to the Astros just past trade deadline. All these are homegrown players, and Boston let these guys go. These are all players that have helped teams get into the postseason, do great things in the postseason, and some of them just won a World Series this year. So my thoughts here is that why would you let these guys walk, especially a guy like Xander Bogaerts, especially a guy like Mookie Betts, but that's a whole different story. That's long gone. But when we are at this now, I'm going to ask you real quick about Bogaerts, but then kind of transition into, is it do or die with sign Devers or, basically pack up and move to Europe, Sean?
Yeah, I mean, wow. So, like, first of all, Xander Bogarts, I thought for sure he would have been back in Boston.
It's
Tough to
crazy.
imagine. Just like Aaron Judge in New York. But you know what? Good on the Padres for jumping in there and blowing away the
I had
competition.
not for 1 second did I think that we were going to see Xander Bogaerts sign with the Padres. So, like, not for one
No,
second. They already have
no.
13 shortstops on their starting nine. So, I mean, yes, I know
Yeah,
math
it's
is hard, but
insane. It's insane to me. Like and it must be not palm trees outside of the stadium there. It's obviously money trees. It's just
mhm.
that they're growing their own cash. And you know what? It's the nature of the business, for the Red Sox. And I know it's probably for their fan base more of a gut punch than it is the actual team itself. There are ways that they can kind of recoup that, but it's not going to be this year. And they keep they continue to swing and miss on free agent names that were available. They tried for Zach Eflin, they tried for Jose Abreu, they tried for Andrew Heaney. And it's a long list of swings and misses, including Xander Bogaerts.
Right.
So that's a tough offseason, coming off a tough season. And they have started that process of addressing some of their needs. They had in 2022, their bullpen was the fifth worst in baseball at a 4.59 ERA. So bringing in Kenley Jansen and Chris Martin is a start, but I mean, they need a healthy Chris Sale. They need help, right? That they've got a lot of young talent. Like Bobby Dalbec is a guy who can hit home runs with the best of them, but strikes out far more than almost anybody I've seen. He's Chris Davis material here,
There we go.
which is good news for him, right? And the future of his family.
Yeah, he's going to be able to get paid
wealth.
till 2077 or something like that. So
exactly. So you don't even have to hit baseballs to create generational wealth in this business. But anyway.
What I see about this right off the bat is that obviously, them signing these bullpen pieces like, Kenley Jansen, Chris Martin, those are great and all, but I feel like we are possibly talking about, especially Kenley Jansen, their tail end of their career. So is that something that, okay, it's excitement because the name, or is it something that they're actually going to be producing big numbers? Now, we didn't see terrible play from Jansen last season. Obviously, he had some rough goes towards the end of his Dodger days, but again, that does concern me. Again, with these swings and misses of all these free agents, that's not likely with Boston. And then that's something that makes you wonder with their recent success and maybe how their management is acting. If not only are we going to see a bad production on the field, a bad product on the field, if you will, we might be seeing some hot seat talks all season long about the general management of the Boston, organization, and maybe a shift in a different direction. Because I do feel like that is going to be a storyline we talk about all season, because I don't see, like right now, these are my early prediction winners for will be sellers at the deadline come this season for the AL East, like without questions.
Which may actually make the Martin and Jensen signings a little bit more impactful that way. Maybe they can help the team more at the trade deadline than actually impact the team's fortunes by the end of the season. Now I know, a 2-year deal. But what happens at the trade deadline is you have a guy available plus has an extra year of control, right? There's that added kind of return that you can get from that. And maybe that's where these two signings can help them. Because as of right now, I'm with you. I just don't see, unfortunately for our Red Sox fans out there, I just don't see how they can continue to swing and miss and still somehow compete in this division.
Not in this division, no. Maybe if you're in a different division, maybe AL, NL Central, something like that along the lines, maybe you can have a different strategy, and that strategy might work. But in the AL East, that's just not the case. We got a comment coming in from Effect You saying the Red Sox are making conscious effort to purge the organization of the holdovers from the Dombrowski years. Their approach of building a pitching staff and reimaging their lineup will continue. Now, thank you for that question or that statement. And I do agree with you. I do think they're definitely rebuilding and starting over. That's just something that I don't think we've been used to see with Boston. They've always tried to do a strategic rebuild, if you will, to try to stay competitive and not go to, the bolts and nuts. But I think we're closer to the metal than we are with them being in that competition, 500 range of just missing the playoffs. Now, we are still talking about the Boston Red Sox. As much as we kind of gave them crap here, I do think that we are going to see some kind of quality product at some point this season from them. They are going to compete. It's not going to be a team like we get 110 losses from some of the past Orioles seasons, if you will, in the past. But I do think that this is going to be a team that initially right now, unless there are some crazy changes in this division, they are easily, in my mind, the fifth place team in this division.
Yeah, and for they're going to be as competitive, maybe. You can draw parallels between them and the Orioles in a sense, because they're going to be around the bottom of that division, which is more of a comment about the other teams than it is about them, really. And the Red Sox could very well surprise some people and get health from Chris Sale, and they could be competitive. But again, not because they're young and upcoming. I think it's because they've managed to somehow kind of plug holes here and there and get lucky, to be perfectly honest. And that's unfortunate because Red Sox fans are not going to take too kindly to another really poor season.
Yes, I don't think that's going to happen whatsoever. I do
Yeah.
think that we are going to be hearing about, letting it all burn down at some point when it comes to the entire management. I'm sure we'll hear some, sell the teams. I think we're going to get maybe some paper brown bags in the stands this year at
Oh,
at the Green Monster. I think that might be the case. All right, let's head into the Tampa Bay Rays, which for some reason every single year always seems like they do the small little moves but still find a way to be competitive. Last year, honestly, was probably one of their worst seasons in probably the last five, but still a pretty decent season. They still, stay competitive. And when you play them, you know that you're going to be in for a hell of a series. So far, they haven't done much in the offseason. They did bring back the hometown kid and Zach Eflin to play for the Tampa Bay Rays. I thought that was a pretty cool story. I always like when you see hometown kids come back and play,
yeah.
especially if it's towards the tail end of their career. I think Eflin's still got plenty of time to do what he's got to do, though. So he came out with a pretty cool quote when he got signed. He said, "I want to surround myself with a bunch of guys that just want to get better and play in the final game of the season and win it." Well, we've seen Tampa Bay get to the final game of the season. Can Zach Eflin be the guy that can get them to go farther? That's the question that obviously every Tampa fan is hoping for. But I do think they're going to need to do a little bit more. But it makes you wonder if they will, because we haven't seen that really in the past with Tampa and free agency. They don't make that big splash. They build from within and then trade when they're ready to go. They make some of the best trades probably in the MLB.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. Any general manager in baseball would love to have the string of fortune that the Rays have had, because I refuse to believe that luck is not a part of it. You know, that the way they're able to just flip talent around and get always win a trade. They've got the roster, the talent level to be able to do that. And if I'm the general manager in Tampa Bay, I'm just kind of sitting back and saying, okay, we'll gauge some interest. They were apparently interested in Jacob deGrom, which blew my mind. You don't spend money in free agency and you're going to now sign one of the most expensive pitchers ever. But you know what? It's a sign, again, that there is some money and for value that they feel is worth it. They're going to spend. So it'll be very interesting to see if that continues, though. I don't know that it's so much a general pattern as a one-off for the right player. But it doesn't matter, really. They don't need to sign one of these big arms. They've got a starting rotation that is not flashy. It's not the big names. It's certainly not expensive, but it will compete. Shane McClanahan's one of my favorite young pitchers right now, and I would trade one of my own children for him to play for Toronto, right? So they've got some work to do, though. But again, because the Tampa Bay Rays have an unbelievable well from which they can drop a massive bucket in and
Wild.
address the needs they need to address. So I don't think they're in panic mode or anything like that. But they certainly do have, Christian, some holes that they need to fill. And that's going to be a bit of a challenge for them.
You talk about the starting rotation, and obviously we've seen some great things from them this past season, but we did see a lot of injuries as well. Now, obviously, every team has these woes, but I feel like Tampa really dealt with some really rough injuries, especially towards the end of the season. We saw that not just the pitching staff, but we also saw it with guys like Kevin Kiermaier, Mike Zunino. We saw some pretty impactful things that might have really pushed them, and I think it did push them out of the AL East contention. Now, you talk about this DeGrom thing. I've heard this before. I think you talked about it on your show with Jace from the Couch as well. I don't really believe that they were in the running. And this is my thought behind this process. Last year, they also said that they were going to be in the running and make offers for Freddie Freeman. I believe the DeGrom rumors as much as I believe the Freeman rumors. But I feel like those rumors did come from the Tampa Bay organization, if you're catching where I'm getting from. I don't know if they actually did make an offer, or if they did, it was probably something that wasn't very serious. Just to say, hey, we were in the mix for the big time guys, but we didn't get them. oh, well, I guess we'll just grow from homegrown and find ourselves back in the ALCS. So I don't know if that's the case,
Right.
but if they did say they were the DeGrom, they definitely weren't serious, at least in my mind.
Well, not serious enough to pay, what what Texas is paying, certainly, and that's and maybe you know what, maybe it's that Tampa Bay front office playing their games, their reindeer games like nobody else can,
Yeah.
and good on them if that's the case. If I were a fan, I'd be a little uh, miffed if that's the only purpose of even mentioning a Jacob DeGrom, But luckily, there aren't that many Tampa Bay Ray fans that are going to rage against the stadium anytime soon.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, maybe I'm thinking too much here. Maybe that's just a good assumption on my side. I just can't see it. I just can't see that being the
Yeah.
case. Probably the biggest conversation and biggest storyline that we're not talking about with the Tampa Bay Rays, which we have to end that right now and talk about it, is can Randy Arozarena win his 5th in a row Rookie of the Year award this coming season, Sean?
Yeah, I mean it seems like it, right? Like every year. I mean, he was. In all honesty, if I'm not, this is just off the top of my head because I didn't know we were going to talk about this, but I think he qualified 3 years in a row.
He did, yeah.
I know we and I joke about this too on our podcast as well. But man, and what a great talent! If you can,
Yeah.
if you can get 5 in a row, Rookie of the Year, you're in the Hall of Fame for sure, buddy.
Yeah, he
You're
was
the
one
only
of the
player to ever
first.
do it.
He was one of the first to hit a home run over the new wall at Orioles Stadium at Camden Yards. So I give him props for that. That alone deserved for him to get Rookie of the Year last year. I think he was finally not eligible last year. So obviously,
Yeah.
I think that's the last time I'll make that joke. But it does seem like he has been in the running for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
What a good way to end off the Rays there. Again, I don't know if they're going to find a way to get back to where they were. Again, this division, I keep wanting to say conference. This division is just so interesting. And it's one of the most difficult divisions in years past. But this year, I think it's just more interesting, if anything, because we're seeing teams like the Orioles take that step up. The Yankees and the Blue Jays are kind of right now in a different tier in my mind. And then you always can't count the Rays out. I feel like no matter what, you just count the Rays out. And then it's crazy to say, but the Red Sox, a team that we have seen do so well year in and year out, are in my mind just like way below the other 4 in this division. But again, with the Rays, I just don't think you can count them out, Sean.
Yeah, no, and you can't. But one thing I think we should talk about before we leave the Rays, they need a catcher
Yes,
and
they
they
do.
need a first baseman. And what's really interesting, the only reason I think we should talk about it is because we're talking about the AL East division. And I've read a couple of things where they're interested in one of the Blue Jays catchers, in Danny Jansen, Alejandro Kirk, or Gabriel Moreno. Obviously, Moreno being their preferred option, given that he's the youngest and has the most team control. It makes sense. But also on the first base side, that they were connected in some way, said to be interested in Bobby Dalbec of the Red Sox for the first base job, which I find very interesting because for an analytical team, you would think that somebody who strikes out as much as Dalbec does, would be less than appealing. However, that doesn't seem to matter. I don't know if there's anything to this whole trading within the division thing, and how much of a premium other teams would charge for that. But Christian, I think it's fascinating to me that the search for the improvements that they need may actually come from the division.
Yeah, interdivision trades are always interesting. I do believe that there is a premium involved with it because of the aspect behind it. However, if you are a good general manager, and we've seen that with the Rays by no doubts, if you believe that that's going to make your team better, you go for it. It doesn't matter if you're trading with whoever team. It doesn't matter if you think you're going to be able to. You're going to face the Dodgers in the World Series. If you got to trade your guy to the Dodgers, then you go and do that, and then you just test your luck in the World Series. And the same goes interdivision as well. Whether you got to play them, this year with the new schedule, you actually got to play them less. So I think the premium actually might go down, or at least the thought of trading interdivision might not feel as bad because you really have to play with, against more teams this season. Every team is playing against every team this year. Now, obviously, divisions still mean something, but just not as much moving forward. When you think about interdivision trades, and I like the one with Toronto, and I think this is a good segue because we're going to get the Blue Jays next. there's so many catchers with the Blue Jays in this system that,
Mhm.
and obviously you got to think that one's going to be on the market and maybe one's going to be moved. If you are the Rays and you're interested in one of these catchers, you probably have to give a premium up because every one of those catchers in that system are pretty dang good, at least the ones
Mhm.
that are being in talks right now. And you'd have to assume that that's going to be probably some kind of arm that's going to come back in that direction. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be a McClanahan going back there, although you'd probably hope that you could adopt one of those catchers, make him your kid, so you could send it back over that way for McClanahan, like you said. But um, I just don't think that's the case. However, I do think the premium is pretty high. I mean, I think it could be something, whatever tier is below McClanahan. What would that be? Glasnow? I don't know if that's the case because he's been injured. However, something along that lines may be what it has to take to get it done. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that if you're the Blue Jays and you're looking at Tampa Bay, first of all, for me, Tampa Bay is a team that is going to compete with the Blue Jays in the division. So I'm not going to do anything to help them out. If anything, I'm going to make a trade that'll kind of take away some of that pitching prowess that they are able to just throw out there nightly. But if you're Toronto, I think you're focusing on not just pitching, but you're also thinking about the outfield as well. That you need to be able to have one more piece, preferably a left-handed bat, to go along with Kevin Kiermaier to complete the outfield. Because right now there is no corner outfielder to replace Teoscar Hernandez, and you don't have to replace him with a like for a like. You don't have to replace it with 35 home run power. You can replace it with a different type of hitter. But I think you need to look at either an outfielder, a bullpen arm, or a starting pitcher. I think the Blue Jays are kind of may have to resign the fact that they're going to run Kikuchi. You say Kikuchi out there in the fifth starter spot, and that could be fine. As a fan, I'm like, no, let's get something a little bit better. But if I'm looking to trade to the Tampa Bay Rays, I want one of those flame throwing bullpen arms at least. And then maybe another arm as well for one of my catchers. And then it just becomes which do you prefer? You know what I mean? Do you prefer Danny Jansen, who's world famous for his work with pitchers? Do you go with Alejandro Kirk, who is probably one of the best contact pure hitters in baseball?
Yeah.
Or do you go with the youth and then somewhat versatile Gabriel Moreno as well? And that's just a matter of, I think, the preference of whoever the suitor is.
Yeah, I feel like probably that the GM of the Jays and then whoever is talking is probably trying to figure out and getting a package for all three. I assume that when a team is talking to the Blue Jays, they're not just talking about one. They're probably getting a trade offer or trade package for each three or all three of those players, and then deciding if they're going to make pull the trigger on either of those, or at least come back an offer. Now, that's really interesting when it comes to the Jays and the Rays. Now, let's really dig into Toronto here as we slide over. And let's kind of stick with this catcher conversation here for a little bit. And because I do think this is one of the most interesting storylines in all of baseball this offseason right now, not just the AL East, is the Toronto catching situation. Because now we have started to see some of these catchers come off the board. Wilson Contreras going to St. Louis, and we saw Sean Murphy trade, which was a wild trade. Milwaukee found a way to get in there. We're talking off the air. It's just a wild trade. So now we're not talking about maybe just a 1-for-1 trade. Another team could possibly get in the mix. I mean, you can never predict those trades. Those are crazy shenanigans. However, with the Rays, we just talked about the possibilities of them. You said you don't want to get the Rays into any type of, trade unless if it makes them any better. Now, I get that. I understand it. I'm more of the side though. If it makes your team better, I don't care. That's always my prediction. I don't care if you you beat them on the field. If it makes you feel better, it helps you sleep at night. So be it. But let's go out of the division a little bit, which is crazy. Well, we're talking about the AL East, right? We're still talking about the Jays. Relax. With the catchers, what would be your dream offer? Now, what catcher would you want to get rid of? I know this is a good one thrown at you. It's, what catcher would you get rid of, and who would you want to chase after? Like, you can give a team, and you can give a couple, like maybe some packages, options. Interested here. Throw it on the spot a little bit for you.
Yeah, I think if it's me, I'm looking down to Arizona They have
Nice.
not one, not two, but three left-handed hitting center fielders. And I'm not even talking about Corbin Carroll. So they're stacked as far as that position goes, and
Young
this would be
too.
kind of and young, right? And then that's the kind of thing. Like this would be one of those good old-fashioned baseball trades where I have a lot of this, you have a lot of this. Let's see if we can help each other out here. And so I would love to see an outfielder. You know what? And I would be like, it would be the best offseason ever if they could throw in Zach Gallen and all his money and all that stuff. And then that would be like one of those kind of trades that I think in all honesty, the Blue Jays fan base has been looking for and waiting for. We heard it was a possibility. Something big may need to happen to kind of get the right pieces in the right place to make a run. So I'd be looking down there for sure, and I would be looking to expand it, as you said. And if I'm the Toronto Blue Jays, I'm looking for the best return possible. And so if that means I have to give up, like I just said, one of the best pure hitters in all of baseball to do it, who has, I believe, 6 years of team control left. That's
Which
a
is wild.
big
Yeah, wild.
price to pay. Uh, and that may be appealing for a team like the Diamondbacks, who are going to need to kind of start rebuilding here and changing the ship in the right direction. So, Alejandro Kirk has a lot of appeal. And the question has always remained: is he going to stay at the catcher position? With his body type and all that stuff. And I don't really buy into that much at all. But then it's a question of, or do you want to trade Danny Jansen, who's only got 2 years of team control left, and has more major league experience. So if it comes down to me, I think I'm going with Alejandro Kirk, coming off the All-Star season, unfortunately. And it's not that I want to trade him, because let's be real, the Blue Jays could not trade anybody,
Right.
and they would be better for it, really. I'm not saying they have to trade Alejandro Kirk, and I want it to be him, but I think you're going to get the most value out of him. In particular, when you also look at the rest of the roster and how much DHing time there's going to need to be filled, and how much DHing time Alejandro Kirk himself would need, and then Danny Jansen can mentor the young Moreno. And make that transition for him, if he is really the catcher of the future, like they keep saying.
I'm so interested in that topic, and I know something's going to happen by the time the season starts. I just can't see Toronto keeping all three. If they do, that's great. Just
Yeah.
like you said, you'll be better for it. I just can't see that happening. So I'm really interested. This is probably one of my most interesting topics, and I would love to see one of those guys from Arizona come on over, or a nice package. I think that would be a nice, with that young core that Toronto already has. That'd be fun. Arizona's a fun team. I can't wait to talk about them in our NL West preview. They're
Mm-hmm.
kind of like the Orioles of the West right now. I think they are building up, and they're doing some really good, fun things. Speaking of the Orioles, I guess a past Oriole now is on the Blue Jays. That's Kevin Gausman. Alex Manoah had some fantastic pitching for the Blue Jays last season. Now you add Chris Bassett into the mix. You said you're going to think that Kikuchi's probably going to have to be in that mix as well. There is some rumors going around that the Blue Jays are also showing interest in Johnny Cueto as a possibility to add into the rotation, which I thought was pretty interesting. I thought, he definitely shined pretty good for Chicago last year coming into the mix. I thought that'd be a fun, maybe flex spot. I think he's going to be a flex kind of guy this come season. But talk to me about this rotation of Toronto. Do you think that, right now where they sit, this addition of Bassett, that's huge. That's something that really can make them take that next step forward.
Yeah, and a lot of people, myself included, when the offseason began, it's that pipe dream of a Justin Verlander, because the Blue Jays had been in on him the previous time. So there was all that hype and kind of looking at the top tier of pitching, but the Blue Jays went in and said, you know what, okay, cool, pitching is going for this much. Let's slide in here and grab somebody who is going to pitch 30 games. Like, that's the first thing. And what Toronto has actually done now is they've built a rotation with Manoah, Gausman, and Barrios and Bassett now, all 30 starts. So they're really addressing this idea of starters going, first of all, staying healthy, eating innings, and all of that stuff, right? Just to save the bullpen as well. And that's a big topic up for debate. Is a bullpen too tired? Was it overused? Whatever. Regardless, clearly the Blue Jays front office is building a rotation that would suggest they thought that the bullpen absolutely was overworked. The
Right.
problem for me is that a lot of that time came when Yusei Kikuchi took the mound. So there's that fifth spot, right? So I would love to see even a Johnny Cueto, just somebody who can come in and compete with Kikuchi for that fifth spot. I think you got to earn it in a year where the Blue Jays are clearly going for it.
Yeah. Oh, I think, yeah, absolutely. I thought they were going for it last season, which I mean, I still
Right.
think they were. But I think this year, especially, I think Toronto is really in that window. If you believe in windows, I know we've had that conversation
Mm-hmm.
in the past. If you believe in said windows, speaking of the bullpen, that's what they got in return for Teoscar Hernandez with Seattle. Eric Swanson was one of the guys to help with that bullpen focus.
Mm-hmm.
There's a couple other names involved in that as well. And you said there was actually, I remember you talking to me about this before our conversation in the past, that the trade actually was more involved around them with that focus. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think the Adam Mako, I believe his first name is Adam for some reason. I'm doubting myself, but I'm pretty sure that it's Adam Mako. And anyway, he seems to be somebody that the Blue Jays feel can be one of the best starters in baseball with a few adjustments, and that to me is rather interesting. So you get a near elite reliever in return for Teoscar Hernandez. You save about $14 million by trading Teoscar Hernandez, and you get a potential high ceiling arm in return as well. The only thing it cost you was a massive hole in your lineup. So there's give and take. You gotta pay to play, I guess. But it is a fascinating deal for a number of reasons. It has a lot of layers to it, and I think you're right that Mako absolutely is one of those large layers.
One more player to talk about that you did sign, and I know you're not too excited about this one, and that's Kevin Kiermaier. He did come over from
Yeah.
the Rays in for agency. It's a 1-year deal, $9 million. Do I have to say it again? Fine, I will. Thank you. There's not a 1-year deal that I don't like. I mean, Kevin Kiermaier, whether he is someone that can just flip your rotation, maybe be a nice guy in the 9 spot,
Yeah.
regardless, he's going to bring nice defensive play to your team. That is something that you're going to get night in and night out with this guy if he can stay healthy. Because last year we did not see that happen. So that's something to keep in mind. He's been with the Rays for a long time. And if you can be on that team for a long time, I think you're doing something right with all their analytical pressures and pushes. And even though he's aging, to finally make that step to move out. Again, I think that he could be a nice piece to either. He doesn't have to be an everyday player, but if he does, be a nice guy to sit in the 8-9 hole, flip your lineup, get ready for that young core of Bichette and Vlad and all those good guys up top. I think that can be a good piece. I know you're just not super excited. Is the reason you're not excited just because it's not a flashy name that are still left on the table, or is it just something that's just not exciting you, period?
Yeah, I think with Kevin Kiermaier, like the Blue Jays ran out several last year, super light hitting, defensive first players, and up until this point, the only addition that they've made to replace Oscar Hernandez is Kevin Kiermaier, who, for what he is. I appreciate, what he is. He's a great defensive player, good teammate, all of those things, and he will spell George Springer from center field, which is worth quite a few million just on its own,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I do see the value of a Kevin Kiermaier. I just don't see how, at this point, with everything Toronto has done and kind of where they are and what's out there, I think they've got a difficult climb ahead of them to round out that outfield because they can't be happy with how it is now, as it stands right now. So if you've got Lourdes Gurriel in left, and then you've got Kevin Kiermaier in center, you've got George Springer in right. That's not terrible. It's actually quite good. The issue is then that means Whit Merrifield is your next outfielder, right? And he's not necessarily a true outfielder. In fact, I think he should be the starting second baseman. So, they need one more outfield bat. And I think that's kind of the reason behind my about Kevin Kiermaier. I've spent a long time hating him as well as, playing for
Fair.
the
That's
Rays.
fair.
But I will give him props too that if you can play Gold Glove center field at Tropicana Field, you can play on my baseball team any day.
Yeah, that's a crazy stadium. I've been there, and
Yeah.
that's one of the weirdest stadiums. I got to see David Ortiz hit a home run against the Rays, I think almost 10 years ago now, but it's still a memory I'll never forget because it's just one of the wildest home runs I've ever watched because you could watch it the whole way and then it stayed inside because it's, being in a dome,
Yeah.
just wild. I don't, baseball belongs outdoors, regardless. And rant there. That's my old guy rant. I think I felt a couple gray hairs come in. Now, with the Jays here, again, we talked about they're going to be competitive, no doubt about that. We talk about their rotation, talk about their bullpen. You know, now there's a lot of conversation here moving forward about what's going to happen with their infield as well. A lot of people don't really like the idea of Bo Bichette being in that conversation. I know Santiago Espinal. I've heard that from the past. Last little bit here on the Blue Jays. What do you think that gripe is about? Do you think that's just some hot air, or is that something that can actually lead to a big concern moving forward?
Bo Bichette is a concern defensively at shortstop, and I can't sugarcoat it. He is offensively one of the best shortstops in baseball, and you can't take that from him. But defensively, he's almost a liability. He may have single handedly gotten Vladimir Guerrero Jr. his Gold Glove nomination last season. Just because of the throws, and that's his biggest problem, right? Whether it's rush throws or off balance throws or whatever. And so, the Blue Jays have put a premium this offseason. They've said it multiple times on run prevention. And that would be like probably, other than, obviously pitching, that would be the single biggest glaring need, is to address the defense at shortstop. Whether they do it or not remains to be seen. I'd be surprised, in all honesty, at this point, given the nature of what's out there and who's out there and how much they've already done. I'd be surprised, unless there's, Bo Bichette is part of some massive trade that's gonna, like one of those, Fred McGriff, Tony Fernandez type that the Blue Jays have.
Yeah.
P.S. Congratulations to Fred McGriff on the Hall of Fame,
Right.
richly deserved. It's about friggin' time.
Well, you said that 'tis the season for that because you did bring up McGriff's name when he did make it into the Hall of Fame. So that's something interesting. I don't know if we're going to see that, but wouldn't that be absolutely wild? That would be, I think, a head scratcher moving forward. All
Mm-hmm.
right, we've delayed long enough. I think we both were dreading this. That's why we saved it for last. But let's talk about the New York Yankees here. There's plenty to talk about with this team, and first and foremost, we have to talk about Aaron Judge, obviously returning. There was some conversations, and obviously even John Heyman, and I'm sure John Heyman's is absolutely hated in New York right now, stating that he's going to go to the Giants. A couple minutes later, puts out a tweet and says, "Just kidding." I think he dropped below Bobby Nightingale after that tweet and trustworthiness. So a lot of issues going on with that. But he gets re-signed, 9 years, $360 million. Very interesting. Very interesting with Aaron Judge. A lot of thoughts on that. I was personally hoping he'd go to San Francisco. One, because it's called the Giants, and how cool would that be? I mean, just come on that half. And I think it just would have been neat to see him and the West Coast, and I think the NL West would have been better for it. Yankees
Mm-hmm.
would have still found a way to be the Yankees, right? So I was rooting for it. However, him coming back in pinstripes will make sense. He's going to look like he's going to spend his entire career as a Yankee. I believe they need to give him the captain for coming back. I think that's the thing that, I know that's a big deal in Yankee land. I think that has to happen. What's your thoughts about Aaron Judge returning? You hate it, right?
Uh, Honestly, no, I can't hate it. I would love to hate it, but I can't, because I think it was the only possible solution for this offseason. And I'm not even convinced that all the trips out to San Francisco and all of that stuff wasn't specifically to come back to New York
Right.
anyway.
To raise
I'm
to
not
raise it up,
convinced.
to raise
Yeah.
the bank. Yeah.
I mean, like, because how can the New York Yankees possibly, not even like, take away the context of competing for the division, take away all of that, how can they just let him go? You know what I mean? And I know they made offers and all of that stuff too, but essentially at the end of the day, it would have been just letting Aaron Judge walk after the season that he had, after being the face of that team and the really one of the only highlights of that team,
Yep.
in my mind. Certainly outside of New York,
Mm-hmm.
Aaron Judge was the Yankees, right? So it was a foregone conclusion in my mind. So when, the numbers, that doesn't matter to me at all, really. It is what it is, because he was going to come back anyway. And it just makes it the division that much more fun. As much as it would have been great to see him hitting Barry Bonds type home runs out in San Francisco.
Right. Yeah, that would have been really fun to see. I mean, it
But
would have been fun to
yeah.
see, but we're not getting that. There was an interesting thing as well. Obviously, it was between New York and San Francisco, a lot bouncing back and forth between there, but there was also an offer from the Padres that was very sizable. And the Padres just seem to be all over the place, and it really just makes you wonder about those money palm trees you talked about earlier in the show.
Mhm.
But what was it, 14 years for what, $400 million or something like that? It was wild. I mean, insane. Do you believe that was actually an offer, or was that still the same kind of concept of just trying to drive the money up from the Yankees?
Okay, so this is fascinating to me. I don't know if San Diego is on there, like, let's just collect as much talent as we can and hope to God something sticks. It's the spaghetti theory, right?
Yeah.
Like, throw it against the wall and see, right? I don't know. I can't get my head around the San Diego Padres. If I'm one of their fans, I'm like, I don't care. This is the greatest ever. It's the greatest time to be alive. I don't know if that was a ploy or not. But what I did find interesting is when I read about this offer that San Diego allegedly made, that Major League Baseball would have vetoed it right away, saying it was the length of the contract would only be to circumvent the competitive balance tax, right? Which I found very interesting. Because at first, before I read the whole competitive balance tax and it was the focus was really on that 14-year term, I was like, oh, of course, Major League Baseball is going to step in and block anything that takes Aaron Judge out of New York, right? That's where my head goes as a Blue Jays fan and somebody who's not a fan of the Yankees. And also, Christian, did you hear that story? There was a study done of balls, and there was a percentage, and oh shoot, I wish I had it because it fits with this so well. But essentially, they studied balls used in 2022, and the ones that were specifically like juiced or dead or whatever, and overwhelmingly, the sample that they took out of New York was skewed heavily to juiced, and everywhere else it was dead. I
Summer of
mean,
22. I mean, they found a way to come back after COVID to bring that money back up. Why don't we have a home run race? I mean,
I
if you
mean, it,
remember, some of the steroids, if you will, became legal at the beginning of this season as well. Now, not all of them, as we know, Tatis
yeah,
Jr. there, but some of them became legal, if you will, in the
right,
aspects of, well, that we're not going to test for them. So
right, yeah,
take
yeah,
that as you will. I'm not saying that Judge did that, but there was a lot of things that lined up in the aspects of, well, we got to find a way to, especially after this lockout in CBA we just had, and the owners and everybody talking about how they don't make enough money. And then
mm,
all of a sudden we have a crazy home run race that wound up having some pretty good numbers for the MLB season this year. Really
mm,
makes you scratch your head. Okay. I think I just saw some more gray hairs come out for all my controversy theories. Now,
yeah,
another thing with the Yankees here. Now, I think we can talk about Aaron Judge and what he's going to do until we're blue in the face. So let's put a cap on that one.
yeah,
Congrats for Judge coming back. That's good. I think it's good for baseball to have him on the Yankees and be in pinstripes.
yes,
Although I would like to see him in the NL West. I think that would make West Coast baseball more fun. Yankees baseball is always going to be fun, but good for Aaron Judge.
mm,
Regardless, there's some more news that's going to be talking about the Yankees during the entire winter as we get all the way into spring. And right now, I think that's around probably the hottest free agent left. And that's Carlos Rondon. They seem to be the front runner right now, as so that some say. Now, this is coming out from John Heyman. Take it as you will, based on what we've seen in the past. But there is a, quote, sizable gap between what the Yankees offered and what Carlos Rondon is seeking in free agency. So I have seen 7 years for 200 million as some options. I've seen some as high as 220 for 7 as well. It looks like Rondon's looking for that 6th or 7th year to be the kicker to make it happen. If he's not interested in 7 for 200 or 7 220, you got to think that, and it's a sizable gap. You got to think that he's looking more towards that 250 mark. That's big time numbers for a starting pitcher.
yeah, yeah, and one who was not too long ago forced to take a 1-year deal to try and prove himself, right? Like
Which he
he's
did.
asking, and he did,
Yeah.
and let's not take anything away from him. That's a sizable ask, though, and you know what? The New York Yankees don't really need Carlos Rodon, right? They've got a good rotation: Nestor Cortez and Garrett Cole, and Uvalde, or not Uvalde. I always mix them up. Luis Severino. That's they've got a good rotation, so they don't necessarily need to go and back up a dump truck full of cash and so they can afford to walk away. It's rather interesting though that they are still in on him. Um, I think that's fascinating because it shows that they're not giving up. They're, you know what I mean. They're not going to just sit back and be okay with the rotation that they have. So that clearly sends a message to the teams that the Houston Astros, the Blue Jays, and those other teams who have designs on the postseason, right? Like the Yankees aren't satisfied with their 2022 season, even though it was a good season. They're not going to be satisfied with that. So that's what it means to me, because I really think they don't need a starting pitcher. They need an outfielder more than they need a starting pitcher.
Glad you talked about the outfielder. Obviously, they had issues with Joey Gallo last season, and Aaron Hicks was no help either. So obviously, looking for outfield help is a key, I think, as well. You talked about the D-backs deal earlier with
Mhm.
the Blue Jays. Is that something that could come into play with the Yankees as well? It kind of speaks down their alley as well in that regard.
Yeah, that's what I'm afraid of. In all honesty, like that's where I see the Yankees going shopping as well. And they, how Tampa Bay has this knack for pulling off trades as well, but the Yankees seem to have this knack for pulling off trades that are incredibly in their favor. They didn't. It feels like anyway they didn't give up much for Giancarlo Stanton, and I'm still bitter about it. So I feel like if it comes down to a trade between the Blue Jays and the Yankees that the Diamondbacks have to choose from, I'm a little nervous about how that's going to end up.
Yeah, that's something interesting to keep looking forward to. Maybe it'll happen before we talk about the NL West, or maybe it'll happen the day after we record about them, because that seems to be the case. All right,
Yeah.
because we're on that nice path of wild things happen as soon as these episodes are over, be on the lookout for some AL East news. And before we end out here, we got to give our early hot takes as we always do. So first, Sean, before we get in here, I want you to give your 1 through 5 of the AL East, how they're going to end the season while we are months away. Who will win the AL East division? Give me your 1 through 5.
I think you're going to see the divisions will go Toronto, New York, Tampa Bay, Baltimore, Boston.
All right. So Sean is going to leave the meeting. See you later. Have a good day, Sean, because you put the Orioles in 4th. All right. Gotcha. I'm going to go Toronto 1. I'm going to give Toronto the benefit of the doubt there. I'm putting Baltimore number 2. Then I'll give the Yankees, then the Rays, then Boston. I think Boston is going to be a deep number 5. I hate to say it, but I think they might be closer to 90 wins than they are anything else, or 90 losses. I'm sorry, 90 losses than anything else. All right. What is your bold take on what is going to be the biggest move, free agency or trade left in the AL East before spring training?
Before I do that, I want to say that was a bold prediction, having the Orioles finish second. And if that happens, they are now going. It'll be tough for me, but
Mhm.
they will be one of my favorite teams to watch.
Awesome.
That
We got this on record. Yes.
yeah, yeah. That they have to finish second in the division.
Okay. All right.
Um, so, man, what's the biggest? Uh, in all honesty, it's going to come from Toronto. I really feel like the Blue Jays are in the best position to pull off a big trade, and I think that's what's going to happen now. The free agent contracts are kind of settling among the top levels, all but done. You've got and there aren't that many options. Let's be real, for teams like the AL East division hopefuls, right? Like there's not a whole lot of top level talent out there on the free agent market for them to go shopping with. So I think you're going to see a trade, and I think the Blue Jays are definitely going to have a catcher involved. I have this nagging feeling that that's not going to be it. I think you may even see another big league piece as well. Maybe a Kevin Biggio type, or maybe even a Lourdes Gurriel, even though he's an outfielder. So I think they're in a position that they have a good farm system as well. So I think they're in the best position to kind of pivot to focusing on a trade that'll shake up this division and put them into that top spot.
Awesome. We'll get that article for Jace from the Couch in your drafts now because it's probably going to happen tomorrow. So you
Yeah.
might as well get that ready to hit publish. Maybe even hit
Call
this.
that.
Maybe even schedule it and just let it go out on its own. And that's just
Mhm.
wild that we put that last week. So if you are wondering, we had a bold prediction. I think I said it right that Trey Turner
Mhm.
would go to the Phillies, and it happened just hours after we went published with this one after going live just last week about the NL East. All right, so mine, I'm going to go homer as well. I'm going to say the Baltimore Orioles make the biggest free agent splash, and we talked about this player. We didn't talk about the Orioles though, but I think the Orioles need to spend. I think it's that time with the fact that we heard about Carlos Correa being a player that they weren't afraid to spend some money on. We saw them almost giving an offer, or they did give an offer of $190 million. I think they're going to shift that over, and I think they are going to be the ones that sign Carlos Rendon. What do you think about that?
Wow. So you think they're going to top $200 million?
You never know. If they were not afraid to
Wow.
give, if they were not afraid to give 7 for 190 for an infield player where they already have some crazy infield depth, maybe they'll move that
Yeah.
for a stud starting pitcher where they have some depth, especially in the minor league system, but nothing too proven. So if they're trying
Mhm.
to get that next step to make it to the playoffs, I think that is where they need to go. So that's where I'm going. I think Carlos Rondon is a Baltimore Oriole. How about that one?
Nice. And if that happens, I am going to hand over all of my financial decision making to you because clearly you know what's up. You're always right. So that's what's going to happen here. All of
Perfect.
my decision making will be in your hands from now on.
Awesome. Good to hear. Fantastic. I'm glad to hear that one. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this nice second episode of the OK Baseball podcast. We'll be back here in 2 weeks from tonight where we go and break down a different division. Where are we going next? We going to go to the Central? We going out west? Where are we going next, Sean?
Wherever you want to go, we'll do a Carmen San Diego.
Mm.
The next episode, the first 30 seconds we'll spend looking for you, and there'll be clues laid out across a map of the United States. It'll be fantastic.
All right, sounds good. We'll let you know where we're going to be next. You can find us on Twitter at Slasher Sports. You can find me at Row Report, and you can find Doyle at Doyle JFTC. You can find all of Doyle's work on jaysfromthecouch.com. And always, you can hit us up on the YouTube. Be sure to subscribe. We're growing this channel as we get going throughout the offseason and get ready for a fantastic season of baseball. Hit like and subscribe while you're there. Leave us some comments as well. We will get back to you. And thanks as always for joining us at the OK Baseball Podcast. Take care.